First of all, let me explain. I'm obviously wearing a turban because I just got out the shower. This is not a fashion statement. Don't tell me someone's trying to start a bonfire. Because if they are, that should be me. I've been to Wimbledon twice this year. Always bump into someone I know from a tennis club that I've been a part of when I'm inside of Wimbledon. This year I bumped into an Egyptian doctor that I know. He had quite the reputation in the tennis club. Massive smile, always grinning. A tennis player that wears a tank top to play tennis as opposed to a polo. Running shorts, so shorter than normal tennis shorts. And a tiny towel attached to his waistband somehow. Quite the character, as you can imagine. It's not keeping in fashion with typical tennis player attire or body or physique either. A buff gym bod frame. But he was explosively powerful on the court, like ogres and this little like rah. But yeah, I just love his attitude. Ouch. So there are quite a lot of like comedy skit channels where people enact different MBTI types, which are just gentle humor. It's no different from people, stand-up comedians, making jokes about different stereotypes of people. So it's no less or more harmful in that regard. It's just good humor. And oftentimes the people who are that type actually relate to it and find it so funny. They're like, oh my God, that's so me. And then like they see another type and they're like, oh my God, that is so my friend. And they'll have a laugh together about it. So it's like all in good humor. There are some deep dive videos on the internet too, where different YouTubers will have their own spin on take on how they see or interpret the MBTI system, which is really fascinating because like there, of course, like all psychological theories in this world are open to interpretation by anybody, whether you're a psychologist, a researcher or not. And obviously MBTI has taken a lot of popularity in just everyday people who don't come from that background, who have become so fascinated by it just based on their own everyday observations of like people. And it's fun that it's become like this public thing that anyone can sort of engage in. You could say the same about tennis, right? Like you don't have to be a professional tennis player to be so into the whole tennis thing. Like, trust me, tennis players in clubs, that non-professional ones, really do take it very, very seriously, and they nerd out on everything from like the mechanics to the strategy. So yeah, personality typology is exactly the same in that regard. Anyone can get into it. And I mean, obviously what's fascinating for me is that I'm always critiquing it through the lens of everything I learned formally within the world of psychometric testing, the stuff that proper organizational psychologists and scientists, the way that they would do things versus how it's actually done in reality. And that's why I find it so fascinating, because it's kind of integrating like traditional theories with like actual real life observations based on normal people. The separation of the two is never a good thing, and finding that integration between the two, I think, is actually a much more wiser type of way of doing science sometimes, even though it doesn't feel like it follows a traditional instructional path of how you should sort of see things. I like treading the lines between the two because it makes life more interesting to me, to be quite frank. And so yeah, like I have a lot of views after watching so many different YouTubers do stuff on MBTI, and I just like talking about it, to be honest. Why are all the apples suddenly falling from the sky? What is going on? I thought I'd provide like a high-level overview of the different ways in which people approach the MBTI to provide a little bit of clarity around what the hell is going on, because I think it trips people up a bit, and it sort of like, it feels a bit like smoke and mirrors sometimes, doesn't it? And so I thought I'd just provide some like perspective on how to understand the MBTI on a very, very high level. So basically, let's start from the very beginning, right? So how did this whole thing come about, right? So there was this Swiss psychologist called Carl Jung that everyone knows about. He's like one of the founding fathers of psychology, and specifically like the psychoanalytic fields. He was a psychiatrist, and he, through observation of his own clients, developed these theories about how different types of people will take information in from the world and make decisions from that information. And he essentially just sort of collected this data and started creating models. This is like the fundamentals of psychology theory, is to collect data and try and analyze that data and create some kind of model about human behavior. And from that model, two women called Isabel Myers and Catherine Cook-Briggs were like big fans of Carl Jung's work, and they wanted to like try and develop that further. So then they started collecting their own data from their own observations, and they weren't psychologists or trained professionally to develop anything like a proper test or anything, but they developed some kind of, I suppose you might call it like a rudimentary questionnaire that helped them to capture this information about how people take in information and make decisions by asking people questions like, how would you do this and how would you do that? So they were the early developers of it, and without them we wouldn't be where we are today. You needed someone to take on board a model and want to take it further forward. And so they'd created some kind of test. And I think over time what happened is that it started to develop popularity, and they needed to like improve its psychometric properties. And what you mean by that is that if you are going to develop a test, you need to start to scientifically validate whether or not the test is measuring what it says it's measuring, and measuring it reliably. And this is where they started to then bring in like psychometric testing experts. I think maybe Catherine Cook-Briggs started training on it under some psychologist, and then eventually they essentially sold the rights to a proper professional company called the Consulting Psychologist Press, like based out of like an American university. I think it's Stanford, maybe Harvard, I can't remember which one, but yeah, like a group of psychologists then took on the rights to that test and then developed it into a proper psychometric test. And then they had to keep on, essentially when you're developing a test like this, you just keep on like putting in questions and chucking them out every time they don't measure what they say they're supposed to measure or measure it reliably. And then I think the MBTI has been developed into like, I don't know, like 5-6 different versions of it over many, many, many years, to the point where it has proven statistically to have like stable properties as a tool. So as a psychometric test, it is sound and solid. But in terms of like other things to do with like, does it predict things? Like, does it predict what kind of job that you should do? Does it predict what kind of partner you should have? All that kind of stuff is a completely different sort of question altogether. Like, there is very little evidence to show for that, even if there are people that you meet in life that would swear by it. The predictability of what that test can predict is like not the same thing as the test itself. And so it's really just a gateway to understanding your personality, and we can just leave it at that. We don't need to think about, does it predict something like what job you should do, or would you be good at your job? But like, let's just like leave that conversation aside, because it just starts to get people really worked up, because they think that it should do more than it says it's going to do. So then that's a proper psychometric test now, which takes like, I don't know, up to an hour to complete, a ton of questions that are asked in various different ways, like positive and negative weighted questions and all that kind of stuff. And so that's the Myers-Briggs company. That's what they changed their name to over time. I think the website's like MBTIonline.com is like the official one. And then because like that is like a proprietary psychometric test, and there were like so many fans who were such big fans of this thing, like so many other different random people developed tests to measure it, like just like how Catherine Cook-Briggs and Isabel Myers did, like their own versions of the tests, and some are psychometric tests and some are like pop quizzes. There's the whole gamut on the internet, and so some people who are curious land on a website that isn't particularly scientifically valid and do the test, and then see like these really poorly presented results, and are just a bit offended by it because of the use of language, which is something that is very, very important in psychology in general, is just the way that language is used to present something, because it's so easily misunderstood in psychology. So, you know, these random people, mom and pop shops of the internet, are like presenting results in a way that might not be responsible as far as the world of psychometric testing is concerned. And this is definitely something I've spoken to clients about so many times in my career. And so then they just do inaccurate tests. And then from that, then other companies who are actually psychometric outfits were like, you know what, we want to improve this model. And this is what happens in all fields, right? You find a model and you want to improve that model and make it better. And they're like, you know what, we're going to try and do our own thing. So 16personalities.com is a psychometric test, and a different group of people very secretly based in like Cambridge somewhere, called Neris Analytics. I have no idea who's running the shop, but like they've modeled the MBTI of a more famous personality questionnaire called the Big Five, that has essentially proven to be fairly stable over time and is accepted within the field of science. Like they try to model it and map it to that and develop their own psychometric test as well, and taken the world by storm because they offer it as like a free online assessment to anyone in the world, as opposed to behind closed doors as like a chargeable assessment that is typically only available to practitioners or people within the corporate world using it for specific reasons like learning and development. So that made it snowball even more into like mainstream media. And so that's where we are today. As far as like YouTubers are concerned, like people on the internet who are like having their own take on the MBTI and doing their own fun thing with it, they don't utilize psychometric testing at all. They don't necessarily like refer people or their fans to these websites and ask them to do the assessment, because I think broadly speaking that they have a different view on how to capture someone's personality, right? They don't necessarily believe that doing a psychometric test is the way to understand your personality. And as you can imagine, there are all sorts of like drawbacks to doing psychometric tests, right? Like, do you know yourself well? Can you answer these questions accurately? Are they too open to interpretation? La da da da. Now, in the world of psychometric testing, there are a ton of ways to counteract for that, like social desirability, as in answering the way that you think it sounds good, is a problem. Internal consistency is a problem. So then the psychometric tests will actually find ways to go through those problems. But at the end of the day, it is a self-reporting tool, right? Which means that it is based on my own assessment of myself. So it's always going to have that drawback. And so that's why in the world of psychometrics, people develop things like 360-degree assessments, where they get you to measure yourself, then other people to rate you on the same scales, and then compare the results to see where the discrepancies lie. Now, the MBTI is obviously not that, but these YouTubers and people on the internet who are doing it basically have this view that a test or a psychometric questionnaire is not the way to find out your personality. They want to take it right back all the way to Carl Jung's and Isabel and Catherine's theories pre-psychometric test, and they just want to be like, oh, this is the model this is the theoretical model that they've presented. These are the different types of personality characteristics, and just read them and understand them and learn them, and then find ways to observe them within yourself. Like, think of examples and then like reflect on them, and then over time fine-tune it until you figure out what your personality is, and ask other people as well, purely based on the model alone. And to be honest with you, I think there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer to figuring it out. Like, you could do the psychometric test and get the same result, and you could basically read the model by yourself, having never done the psychometric test, and like just spend a ton of time thinking about all these different functions of personality and asking other people and come to the same result. Like, there's no one saying that one is right or wrong. Like, it's just a different route of coming to understanding about something. And at the end of the day, whatever you choose to do, like, if you're into it and you're interested in it, you'll eventually get to the answer. I mean, obviously, most people who go that deep end up doing both. They're like, oh, well, I spent a ton of time observing myself, thinking about this model, and I came to the conclusion that this is my personality type. Now let's do the test and questionnaire as well. Oh, look, it correlates, it matches up. Or maybe it doesn't, and you go back to the drawing board. So that's the world of MBTI and personality testing, and it's really not any more complicated than that. If you get into the theory, then it's guaranteed to be life-changing, because it helps you to understand yourself on a whole new level, and it also helps you to understand other people on a whole new level. And the thing that's so beautiful about it is that it helps you to develop so much more compassion for other people and different personality types, because they operate in the world in a very, very distinctly different way from you. Like, the way that they choose to take information in and make decisions, which is a default as opposed to a choice, is like, you can just accept them for who they are, because that's exactly how you do things too with your personality type. And then also realizing that actually that's just like a sort of default wiring to start with, but realizing that just because you are this way by default, or it's like your natural thing, it doesn't mean to say that you can't then develop yourself to focus on other things that other types would focus on too. And it's not to say that you wouldn't, actually. It's just like sequentially how you go about the world. And so it then becomes this natural pathway for development, where you realize, wow, this is how I could operate differently from my natural default wiring too. So it becomes this really exciting journey of personal development and interpersonal development too. So yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it at today. My hair is definitely dry and my towel's definitely coming out. So, wow, looks like a bunch of hay. So yeah, I'm gonna dry up now, and I hope that this video has been an interesting ramble into the world of MBTI. I hope it's made sense, and I probably should make proper videos about it rather than just ramble in my garden while my hair is drying, but it's cool. It's a start. I've had fun making this video. It's aesthetic, naturally. So yeah, until next time, over and out.